Welcome to you, the members of the Planning Committee, and to members of the public we have here today. Just to explain, I am not a member of this committee, but because it's the first meeting, I'm the chairman of the authority, and therefore I'm going to do the first item, which is election of chairperson. So could I please have nominations for chairperson? Mr. Kelly.
I'd like to propose Stephen Huxley as chair of the Planning Committee.
Thank you. Does that have a seconder? Chairman, thank you. Any other nominations? No? So all those in favour for Stephen, please? That's unanimous. Stephen? Stephen?
You go home now?
No, sadly not. Got to cancel.
And do you want any of this stuff?
No, I'll take it. Have a good journey.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your confidence, and I look forward to an exciting and constructive few months within this new committee. The second item is the election of deputy chairperson, and I would like to propose from the chair that Dr. Mike Kelly should be the deputy of this committee. Is that
second that, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? I see all those in favour. Thank you. Congratulations, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you.
Item 3 is apologies for absence, and we have them, I think, from John Petrinos, from Fran Smith, from Evelyn Stacey, who has been substituted by Laura Williams, and from Christine Lawrence, who has been substituted by Mandy Chilcott. Any I've missed? Dominic Elson, yes. Dominic Elson has also made his apologies. Item 4, declarations of interest, stroke lobbying of members, stroke unaccompanied site visits. Does any member wish to refer to any of those areas of interest, please? No. Item 5, public speaking. We have one public speaker on one item, and I will call that speaker when we hear the relevant item. Item 6 is appeals, and this is to note the decision of the Secretary of State in relation to the Lynmouth Holiday Retreat Manor Farm, Linton. Members will recall this was subject of a site visit. That appeal has been allowed, but the application of costs has not been. Mr. White, do you want to comment on this at all?
I think your summary was very good, Chairman. I wasn't really much for me to add. I was just going to reflect, obviously, it's a relatively short decision letter. Obviously picks up on the key issue, which was the impact on the character appearance of the area. The inspector felt, having been to the site, that actually in the context of what was behind the appeal site more than anything, that the scheme had an acceptable impact. And just picking up really on the cost decision, obviously the decision of the authority or members was contrary to the officer's recommendation, but interestingly on the costs, the inspectors come to the view that even though the applicant or the appellant considered the committee had acted unreasonably because they came to view contrary to the officers, that actually the committee is not bound by the recommendation of officers. They're perfectly entitled to come to their own view for planning reasons. It is essentially an exercise of planning judgment in this case, and on that basis the inspector felt that there was no unreasonable behaviour, so the cost decision was dismissed.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly.
The cost decision is one of the shortest decisions I've ever read, but that says something, I guess. So it was a perfectly reasonable decision to arrive at. And my recollection of the site visit is, in reality, I think the site could be divided into two parts, and most members considered the site with the 3 was perfectly acceptable. The difficulty was they also had to consider the 2 and the representations against that, I think from the Town Council, and as we were not able to disaggregate the decision at the time, we went with the refusal, but it was finely balanced, and had it been in 2 parts, I suspect it would have been a different decision. Thank you.
I think that's true. And the key point was that I think members spent a lot of time considering it and looking very carefully at the site. So whatever the decision that we took, it was definitely one made after due and proper consideration. Okay, thank you. Item 7 is development management, and the first item that we have to consider is the returned application at Bryant's Hill, Brompton Regis, application number 6323007, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Rose.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This application at Bryant's Hill is brought before the committee as the committee deferred the application to a future committee back in September 2023 to allow the applicant further time to provide more details pertaining to the proposal, of which is seeking planning permission to establish an agricultural building that will be utilised in connection with the land owned by the applicant. The primary aim of the building is to provide necessary storage for machinery required for land maintenance, as well as dedicated space for dry storage. Another purpose of the proposed building is to create a facility for collecting and reusing rainwater on the site, which could reduce the need for transport for water from external sources to the site itself. So presented here is a location plan. The application site is positioned on the eastern periphery of Brompton Regis, in direct proximity to the boundary of Bryant's Hill Public Highway. The site occupies the northern corner of a field within the expanse of agricultural land. This land is part of a larger collection of agricultural fields comprising an estimated total of 15 acres under the applicant's ownership. Here is an aerial site plan that illustrates the access route to the site via an unpaved track and a field gate located off of Bryant's Hill. The site itself consists mainly of coarse grassland and ruderal vegetation. To the north there is a hedge and tree line serving as a boundary, whilst native hedges enclose the eastern side of the site as well. Here is the existing site and elevations plan, indicating the current state of the area. Notably, there are no existing agricultural buildings within this space, and there is no indication of any prior construction of agricultural structures on the site either. The proposed site and elevation plans here outline the intended changes. The dimensions of the building are set at 13.5 metres by 9.3 metres, and the proposed ridge height of the building is planned to stand at 6 metres, ensuring adequate clearance for tractors. Notably, both the north and west elevations are designed as open fronts, facilitating smooth entry and exit, and in contrast, the east and south elevations will be clad in timber. To enhance site screening, a segment of beech hedge is also proposed to the south of the site as well. So here are some photographs of the existing site, starting with the access from Bryant's Hill. And here is a view of the left-hand side, of the proposed site, and to the right you can see the existing access from within the site onto Bryant's Hill itself. And here are some photos from within the site, facing south and west, away from the proposed development. So the key issues with regard to this application revolve around its compliance with planning policy, particularly in regards to the proposed location of the agricultural building. In accordance with policy SES4, new agricultural buildings must be physically and functionally connected to existing structures related to the business, unless an exceptional circumstance justify their isolated placement. Since the committee meeting held on the 5th of September, the applicant has provided the local planning authority with updated information. This includes the land ownership plan for the entire holding at Bryant's Hill, and additionally the applicant has also submitted an ownership plan for Oakway Farm, which is the primary farm under the applicant's ownership, of which is located some 2.5 kilometres from the land at Bryant's Hill. The applicant contends, as per policy SCS4, that exceptional circumstances do warrant the proposed isolated structure in this instance. Situated 2.5 kilometres southwest of the main farmstead, the building would serve multiple functions. It would store fodder and provide overnight storage for machinery, eliminating the need for continuous transfers between locations for feeding and equipment collection. This setup would significantly enhance the farm's efficiency, both in terms of time and cost. And additionally, the building would offer a clean handling area and shelter for animals during wet months. Consequently, this setup would support expanding the existing sheep flock to include the fields at the Bryant Hill site itself. With reference to landscape impacts, it's paramount to emphasise that evaluating a planning balance between the landscape impact of the development and the functional necessity outlined by the applicant is a fundamental planning consideration for proposed isolated agricultural buildings within the national park itself. Essentially, the greater the landscape impact, the more emphasis must be placed on its functional needs. In accordance, officers have sought comments from the future landscapes officer at the National Park, who has outlined that they have no objections due to minimal visual impact the built structure would have on the surrounding landscape. The LPA does acknowledge that the proposed agricultural barn would be visible within the landscape. However, as highlighted by the future landscapes officer, the proposed building is not on particularly exposed or elevated ground. And is small in nature and is strategically positioned in the corner of the field, largely hidden by existing hedgerows. Additionally, the proposed hedge planting at the entrance would further conceal the building from passing views along the highway. As such, taking into account the issues noted within the presentation and within my report, it considers that the proposed development's benefits and proven functional need in this case do outweigh any potential minor impacts the built structure would have on the surrounding landscape. And as such, the case officer recommends that planning permission be approved in accordance with the recommended conditions as set out within the officer's report. However, I do just need to clarify that conditions 4 and 11 within my report are considered to be prior to commencement conditions. As such, these conditions must be agreed by the applicant before they are implemented. Whilst we have notified the applicant about these conditions, we are still awaiting confirmation of their agreement. Therefore, at this stage, the recommendation is, of course, subject to the applicant's acceptance of these conditions. Right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. Members will be aware of the fact that we did discuss this back in September. We were awaiting further information at that stage, but I think that the sentiment on the part of members was to support this if we possibly could, subject to that information having been provided. It has now been provided, and the officer recommendation is one for approval accordingly. Mrs. Nicholson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's right to say that absolutely right to say that it came to us in a way that we were certainly sympathetic to what was being proposed and understood the generality of the need for it. But what we didn't have was the proper information that we needed on which to make a decision. I'm really pleased to see that it's come forward. I think the applicant had a bit of work to do to put that together for us. And what I think we're aware of is those new conditions must be agreed and accepted. And the applicant encouraged as soon as possible to deal with that. And on that basis, I think I want to propose it.
Thank you. Is that
With the
seconded?
officer's recommendation.
I would second that, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mrs. Chilcott.
Yeah, just a quick question for me. I've looked in the paperwork around a time limit, which is 3 years, and also it asks the nesting bird season is avoided, which is 6 months period of the year. My question is just a simple one. In allowing the 3 years, you've effectively just got half of that time you're recommending they don't build because you're taking your 6 months out of each year for the bird nesting season. Is that reflected in that 3 years, or is that sort of normally a standard across all? That was my question.
Well, although to be fair, I think what the report says was that it must be subject to a competent ecologist having undertaken a detailed check. So something could happen within that period, providing a competent person has assessed the fact that there is no damage that is likely to occur. Yes. Oh, good. Right. Phew. It's always encouraging to be right. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, not really, Chairman. I mean, there is a 3-year time period for them to implement it. That doesn't change by virtue of the conditions, but Chairman's correct. The condition regarding netting birds does stop them from doing it within the bird netting season unless it's checked by a competent person and that detail then is agreed. So if they want to do it during the bird netting season, we just need to check first that there's no netting birds in there. If that's demonstrated, they can then build or commence.
Thank you. I've had scenarios where there have been nested birds when they thought there weren't, so it can be problematic occasionally.
Understood. Mr. Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't at the September meeting, so coming this fresh, but I can see the fact that it's isolated actually brings benefit to the community because it's going to avoid travelling through Brompton Regis. I can see from the farm, so I can see why that brings benefit to the community and why the parish council will be in favour. And the fact that the landscape is going to minimise the impact, I go along with the fact that it's a good proposal.
In the light of the discussion that we had earlier today, would you like to say anything about condition 8?
Only in so much as it seeks some enhancement, but it's not, this isn't subject to biodiversity net gain.
But it's an interesting one that the 3 swallow nest cups are considered appropriate biodiversity enhancement. And it is worth noting what that enhancement can actually sometimes mean in practical terms. Right. I don't see any other members wishing to speak. Ms. Williams.
Thank you. I was at the September meeting, and I just wanted to note thanks to the officers for helping the applicant to get this across the line, because it was clear that it wasn't ready at that time, and it is now. So thank you.
Right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. May I see all those in favour of approval? Con, thank you very much. Good. We move on to item 6241-24001, and this is a proposed new entrance to domestic accommodation at the Polly Sky Gallery, the Wishingwell Castle Hall, Linton, and this is going to be presented by Mrs. Spears.
Thank you, Chair. Polly Sky Gallery, it's an art gallery that also obviously sells paintings, etc. Within Linton. It's in a very, very prominent location at the corner of Castle Hill and Church Hill. The gallery lies within the Linton Conservation Area and is mentioned in the Conservation Area appraisal. The property is part of a group recorded on the Historic Environment Record and as such is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset. The ground floor layout as it currently exists has 2 entrances, one within the main shop frontage on Castle Hill and a second, smaller entrance on Church Hill. The internal layout of the ground floor was altered in the 1970s following the grant of planning permission and is currently open plan. As such, whilst the second doorway was originally a private entrance for the accommodation to the rear and above the shop, it now opens out into the shop. The current proposal is to build a new partition wall to the side of the existing staircase leading to the upper floors, and to create a third entrance, a third doorway in the main facade in order to create a new private entrance for the owner's accommodation above. The new doorway would be created on the left-hand side of this drawing. You can see the cursor. Cutting into the shop frontage. What is slightly less clear, because this is a two-dimensional drawing, is that the corner is here. So you have 2 bays, the door, 2 bays, and then the corner where it turns. And this is how it is envisaged it would look with the extra doorway in that main facade. The shop frontage is traditional and is a good example of a 19th century shop front which has survived largely intact. The frontage is regular in appearance and features large bay windows with green glazed tiles, store risers to the bottom, can be seen here. It should be noted that there is some damage to these tiles to the right of the main shop doorway, but this doesn't detract from the overall attractive appearance of the frontage. I should perhaps note at this point that the reason that this has been brought before the committee is that Linton and Lynmouth Town Council have made a recommendation which is contrary to the officer recommendation. I should also note at this stage that the Historic Buildings Officer has objected. This shows the main shop doorway in the main frontage, and also this second doorway which did originally lead into the private accommodation. It now just opens into the gallery. However, the installation of the additional doorway at the left-hand side of the frontage in this photo would interrupt the line of the frontage, and it would irrevocably alter the symmetrical appearance. It is a very symmetrical appearance at the moment. Given the prominent location within the conservation area, the objections of the Historic Buildings Officer, the status of the building as a non-designated heritage asset, and the importance placed on the retention and preservation of traditional shop frontages within the local plan, officers consider that the potential benefits of the proposal to the applicant do not outweigh the potential harm to the historic and visual environment. The preamble for policy CED6, which is the shop frontages policy, does say that traditional shop fronts, the National Park will seek to retain and restore, and that we should be looking to retain the proportions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spears. We have one public speaker, Polly Skye. Ms. Skye, if you'd come to this microphone, if you could just check that it's on at the top. Thank you. And then you'll have 2 minutes to address the committee from when you start to speak.
Sorry, can you hear that?
Thank you.
Thank you. The Exmoor National Park local plan speaks of making the best use of buildings and addressing the needs of the community. It describes how buildings evolve over time. I'm seeking support for the following reasons. 1. Making a separate entrance and exit will meet criteria of CES6, as it will, quote, improve the safety of anyone living in or visiting the building by creating a complete fire barrier between the gallery and the flat above. At present, if there is a fire in the shop, the only way out of the flat is through the fire or to jump out of a first floor window. Re-CES4, restoration and conservation, I would like to continue restoring the green tiles, which I painstakingly uncovered when I bought the building. Many of the tiles around the front door, now hidden by plants, have disintegrated. I plan to use tiles from where the new door will be to replace the broken ones. Re-CED3, my plan is a, quote, high quality, sympathetic design. The new timber door will be identical to the original door. This will conserve the quality and character of the building. Remaking the best use of my building, separating the residential and commercial aspects will ensure the continued use of both. At present, when I retire, the shop will stand empty as I will not be able to let it out separately. This will be a tragedy for the town. The preservation of shop fronts must be seen within the overall aims of the National Park Local Plan. CES4 stresses the importance of views. Unlike 7 Queen Street in the most visible heart of Old Linton, which was recently granted permission for a separate entrance to accommodation above, my property is rarely seen front on as there is no proper pavement opposite, so my new door would be barely noticed. The Planning Committee must follow guidance, and I've come to assure you that granting me planning will be firmly within the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, members. Who would like to start? Mr. Bray.
Thank you much, Charlotte, for a very good report, and it's given me lots of reading. It's pointing me in the right direction of the various documents. And hearing the owner speak has sort of crystallised some of my thinking. And in the report, you make the point about balancing the harm against the public benefit. That's quoted in the National Policy Framework. The National Policy Framework also goes on to say about finding an optimum viable use of the property as well. And what we've just heard now actually is that is a factor to take into account. Also, when I've looked at the heritage status of the property, it's obviously not listed. It's not a listed monument. It's listed on the HER website, and I looked at that, and that puts it in the same status as the police houses across the road in the conservation area. So, in the hierarchy of heritage buildings, which going through the policy, I don't see it that great. It goes through an SC, S4, isn't it, where it goes through that it's the hierarchy of that. So when you're weighing up the harm to a building of that nature, it talks about the fact in the conservation area, looking at the impact on the area. I mean, I've driven past this property for about 50 years. It's never struck me as outstanding. So that's where I'm looking and thinking the balance between the public benefit and optimising the use of the building going forward. It would seem a shame if the building cannot be utilised. I was recently in Stratford-on-Avon, and a number of buildings up there have been boarded up where they haven't been able to use them. And I think that would be a shame if that couldn't be used going forward. And if the viability of the building couldn't be maintained by splitting the retail bit from the domestic, it seems quite a logical thing to do. And then, of course, that comes back to the harm. And when I look at the shop, a door to the left, I accept there's a balanced judgment to be made there. I would say the balance of the harm of that versus the benefit to the business is quite a fine line. So I'm yet to be decided on that point. So that's just what I'd like to bring to attention. Thank you.
Mr. Bray? Mr. Yabsley?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just wondered if the owner has explored a new staircase directly behind the side door rather than coming from the front. Is that not possible?
Well, you can't do that without...
Mr. Yabsley, I do beg your pardon. We can't have debate with
sorry,
members of the public.
I wasn't directly
No.
to the lady, but asked
It might be appropriate to ask the
chairman.
officer if that has
Yes,
been a discussion
absolutely.
that's taken place.
Thank you.
Chairman, I mean, first and foremost, we're determine the scheme in front of us
Yeah, of course.
today. There's just a couple of things I think just to come back on it, if I may. I mean, I just want to re-emphasise the specialist advice we've received from the Historic Building Officer. It's on page 16 of the papers. It's highlighting the fact that this building does make a positive contribution to the conservation area. That's significant. That's a significant issue. The building is a non-designated heritage asset, so it is of value. It's not a listed building, but it is non-designated as a heritage asset. So that's a significant factor within our consideration here. And the Historic Building Officer, as well as your planning officers, are identifying considerable harm to the shop front as a result of the works that are proposed. So I think within that's something we have to hold as key. And even though there has been improvements, repairs made to the tiles on the front of the shop front, this would cause harm nonetheless. And that's not, if you like, from the officer's point of view, displaced by the fact that there has been some improvements to the shop front. We have to judge the scheme as what's in front of us. The report has looked at the public benefits, okay? The issue that we have to some extent is that that there is no evidence to demonstrate that there isn't an alternative solution. There's nothing to say that what's presented to us is the only solution to ensure fire safety. Historically, the side door, as we can see, that the solid door in the photograph there would have provided the entrance through. That's where historically the staircase went into the first floor. That's potentially still an option. So just from the evidence in front of us, there's nothing to say the shop isn't viable. There's nothing to say the shop won't remain viable. There is evidence to say that the proposal would cause harm, and as a balancing exercise, that's where officers are coming down to. That harm isn't outweighed, particularly on the evidence of the detail in front of us.
Chairman, thank you, and apologies for not prepping my question in a good way. Looking at the two drawings, my view is, in fact, that I'm not satisfied that the loss or change to the front is justified by what's proposed, because I'm not clear that nothing else will perform what is required for the business. The door on the side is clearly in the right place in terms of the street scene, and I would need to be reassured that there was no option of moving the stairs to that position to achieve the end. That would mean no change to the outside. So that's what I've gathered from looking at papers, and thank you, Joe, for that explanation, because it clarifies my concerns. At this point, I wouldn't be able to support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yabsley. Mrs. Nicholson.
Yes, we have the application that we have in front of us. I, like Jeremy, feel that the side door is in the right place, and historically that's how it would feel as though it was most comfortable. Now, however, that's not the application in front of us. In looking at this application, my question for officers is whether it would be possible to condition it, and even actually quite apart from the condition, whether it would be possible to do it, to if there is the left, as we look at it now, the left hand pane of the window, the far left is where the door is to be, is proposed, isn't it? Yeah. Well, is there any way of making that door look as though it is part of the shop window with green tiles at the bottom, etc.? Is there a way of constructing that, and could it be conditioned to make it work? I think that would be give us something to consider here. Otherwise, I'm quite strongly with Jeremy on this.
Chairman, I mean, in terms of the scheme in front of us, that isn't before us, and I appreciate that's been acknowledged. We need to make a decision on the application in front of us.
Yes, so I'm asking, can we do that?
Well, if that's not successful, I think the reason I'm not giving a straight answer is because as officers, I can't imagine how that could happen. Okay, but in fairness to the applicant, they may be able to do something in the future which could convince us otherwise. But that's further down the line.
So
So
it could not be a condition of this application?
I don't think it
Okay.
could be a condition that we could fulfil now.
Kelly.
Interesting discussion, and what Jeremy's had to say was interesting as well. I'm not convinced that there was not a more appropriate alternative, but that's not before us. Just in terms of what is before us, there is a specific policy, CE D6, which does say traditional shop fronts will be retained and restoration will be encouraged where appropriate. And whilst I heard some very good comments from the applicant regarding the considerations leading to this application, I don't think those are material enough to outweigh the conflict with policy. So I'm minded to second the proposers' move that we support the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. With due respect, I don't think we actually have got a motion
Oh,
on
I'm
the table
sorry,
yet.
I misheard that.
So if Mr. Yabsley wishes to make a proposal, right, so you would like to move the recommendation, the officer's recommendation, and that is seconded by Dr. Kelly. Okay, just so everyone's clear about that. Are there any more questions or observations from members, please? Right, if not, then I will now put it to the vote. So the motion is that we refuse the application in line with the officer recommendation. May I see all those in favour of the refusal, please? Those against? Those abstaining? Right. So it stands refused. But I think members were making comments about the fact that they could, in fact, see that the what the applicant was trying to achieve, there may be other ways of achieving it. Okay. Right, thank you. We move on to the next application, which is a GDO 2401, and that relates to part of Weatherslade Farm at Withypool. And that is going to be presented by Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Before I begin the presentation, I would just like to correct a minor error within my own report. On page 27, Lower House Farm should have been Higher Barton Farm, and the location of the main farmstead should have been West Anstey, not Withypool and Hawkridge, where the application site itself is located. So for that, I do apologise for any confusion on that part. Okay, so to begin the presentation, here is the location plan for reference. The entire agricultural unit associated with Higher Barton Farm in West Anstey covers approximately 40 hectares of land. According to the applicant's application form, that is. However, the proposed barn in question is situated within a separate parcel of land as part of the farm within the parish of Withypool and Hawkridge. The proposed building is positioned between two existing agricultural buildings under the applicant's ownership, approximately 250 metres east of Weatherslade Farm. The site is also adjacent to a track that connects Weatherslade Farm itself to the B3223. Here is the proposed site plan depicting the proposed placement of the new agricultural building in red between the two existing agricultural buildings which are in orange. For more visual context, here is also an aerial plan for the site. So here are the proposed elevations of the agricultural building. The structure will be constructed using concrete panels and timber board cladding with anthracite fibre cement roofing sheets. Its dimensions will be 18.2 metres by 9.1 metres with a ridge height of 6 metres. Notably, the north side of the building will be open fronted. Here are some photographs of the site, starting with a view of the proposed development site facing south from the access track. And next is a photograph facing north towards the proposed development site from within the wider field itself. And finally, here is a view facing south over the landscape taken from within the proposed development site. So, as stated within this slide, the main planning considerations for this prior notification relate to the legislation within the Town and Country Planning Order 2015 and specifically Schedule 2, Part 6, Class A. As the officer's report highlights, the proposed scheme is considered in accordance with this legislation, which then brings us to Condition 2 of that legislation, which allows the local planning authority to determine whether prior approval will be required and approved as to the siting, design and external appearance of the proposals. In regard to siting, design and external appearance, as highlighted by the Future Landscapes Officer, the open-fronted building proposed would be sited in the corner of the field on a west-facing slope and adjacent to two existing barns, and as such will share the same access. Policy SES4 of the local plan highlights that new agricultural buildings, where possible, should be positioned amongst existing agricultural buildings in order to conserve the landscape, which have little to no built form. And as such, it is considered that the proposal is in accordance with this policy for those reasons, and as such, its siting itself is considered to be appropriate. With regard to design and external appearance, the use of timber board cladding above concrete panels and anthracite-coloured fibre cement roofing are considered to be acceptable building materials that are typically used for the construction of agricultural buildings on the national park, of which is compliant with policy CES 6 of the local plan. And again, for that reason, it's considered that its design and external appearance are acceptable in policy terms. So, as such, taking into account the issues noted within the presentation and within my report, it's concluded that the proposals are in accordance with the General Permitted Development Order and the policies outlined within the development plan regarding its siting, design and external appearance, and as such the case officer recommends that prior approval is not required from the local planning authority in this case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. Any member comment? Mr. Wright?
Chairman, I presume it's not been before the parish council because it's more about a decision of legality, is that right? Yeah.
Go on.
That's right.
No, because it's a prior notification, there isn't actually, and there's no need to consult more widely.
Dr. Kelly?
Move the recommendation.
Thank you. Right. So, moved Dr. Kelly, seconded by Mrs. Nicholson.
Can I?
Yes, of course.
I'm absolutely happy to second the recommendation. I hope I don't appear to be overly nitpicky, but I am concerned that we should be absolutely right. And the reason for bringing before the authority committee, which is on page 27 of this, or 35 of 51 of the whole paper, the applicant is Christopher Milton, not Robin, so he's son of a member of the authority, not a member of the authority. And even were it Robin, he's not a local member for East Anstey Parish, because it's really important that our parish members are parish elected members for the whole park and not a representative of their parish council.
Yes.
And the other bit is that Robin's not a member of the planning committee.
I think certainly the reference to the specific parish is probably not appropriate, although I think Mr. Milton might be the owner of the land, even if he isn't the applicant.
Yes. And since his son is the applicant, it would clearly fall within us to come here.
If the report doesn't pick it up, but as in the applicant listed here, on the application form it's Mr. Christopher Milton and then just the business, which obviously
I did check with Robin that he had no part in the application.
I'm sure because of the involvement of the member, it would still have had to have come to us, but you're right that we need to be absolutely accurate in stating the reasons.
Yeah, and as I say, I'm absolutely happy that...
Yeah, okay.
Right. Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
I haven't got condition 2 in front of me. It's probably a question to Joe and Joseph. But where it's for a notification application, condition 2 requires the authority to determine firstly whether prior approval is required, and then if it is required, whether it's approved. So is this decision here whether or not it's required, or actually whether it's approved? Because I think it should be that we're saying yes, it's required, and therefore you can see the design side and demonstrations, etc. And then we're saying yes, it's approved.
You're saying it's not required.
Because the recommendation is
But are we saying it's not required, so is then not going on to determine those matters?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Okay. Good. It's been moved and seconded. May I see all those in favour, please? Thank you. And we come to the last application today, which is GDO 24/02, and this is being presented by Mr. White.
Thank you, Chairman. This item is another prior notification, but this time it's for re-roofing of a historic barn at Driver Farm, which is near Simmonsbath, just east of Pinkery. You can see Pinkery on the plan, the left-hand side, red line site where our application site is at Driver Farm. The application obviously comes to committee because the National Park Authority is the applicant. This slide shows the site. The subject building is known as East Barn, and it's the building in the red outline on the slide. It lies within the historic farmstead with the night farmhouse to the right-hand side of the slide there. But there's also a context of a larger, more modern building just to the left-hand side of the building in that shot. That's an aerial-ish, an elevated photograph anyway, looking at East Barn in the foreground with the night farmhouse set behind, and then we can pick up the edge of the more modern building just at the bottom of the photograph as well. That's the final slide. Ignore the red outline, please, on that plan. That's picking up the modern building, but it's the L-shaped building in front of us in this photo that is subject of the application. The report outlines the main planning considerations and explains the nature of the application in relation to the general permitted development order, and also sets out the scope of considerations in the determination of the application. As you can see from the photograph, the roof is in a poor state. There's holes in it. It allows in the weather and water. So it's no longer weatherproof, and that is hampering its use for storage, which is currently put to. The proposal would see the roof replaced, which is currently corrugated asbestos. That would be replaced with corrugated metal. The development and use of materials having regard to the relationship of the buildings around the site is considered to have an acceptable impact on the visual amenity and character of the area. Members will note that wildlife surveys have found that the presence of roosting bats within the building is unlikely, and that whilst the building has been found to support a barn owl, opportunities for the barn owl can be retained through the development proposal. Consequently, the OSA recommendation is that, given the nature of the application, prior approval is not required in this case, and as set out on page 39 of the agenda papers, it's recommended that prior approval is not required. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Keane.
Yes, Chairman, I think the barn needs a new roof. And I also have plenty of room around the farmstead to find other places to roost and possibly nest. It needs doing. I think there's no question that we should accept the recommendation. I would like to propose that.
Right, proposed by Mr. Keane. Seconded by...
I'm happy to second it, Chair.
I'm interested in the proposed material that the corrugated asbestos is going to be replaced with, so corrugated metal rather than any attempt to reslate? Not that that's necessarily relevant to the application. Well, with it.
Chairman, I mean, it's an acceptable replacement material. I mean, slate, I think if someone would offer slate, we'd say yes, that would be preferable, but as the scope of the application, corrugated metals is acceptable. It's lightweight for the building and secures its future use.
And is regarded as an historic material in many circumstances, isn't it? I've got Mr. Yabsley, but did you just want to come back, Mr. Gein, on that?
Well, just to say that yes, it's a similar material, but re-roofing slate would be not what would normally happen anyway. It would be really expensive. So farm buildings aren't normally reslated. They've got corrugated material on their roof, and tin is now the preferred material.
I just note that this is an 1840s building, so it's of some age, and presumably, well, I suppose it might even have been thatched originally. But anyway, I don't want to disappear down too much of the rabbit hole, Mr. Yabsley.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just wondered why corrugated metal and not concrete fibre, which would look very similar. Used everywhere, grey. Have we considered what else we might use the building for? Perhaps we're looking for an insulated box profile. That would be much more sensible if they wanted. I would prefer to see it in grey cement armour.
I'm just going to say, I'm going to repeat it back. We're dealing with what's in front of us, Chairman. I mean, it's a corrugated metal rather than a box profile. I think that's important to stress. But I mean, corrugated fibre cement would have been acceptable as well. In this case, we're dealing with a corrugated roof material again, which is fine.
I don't have a problem.
No. Yes, well, sorry, I started us off on that one, but it's been proposed and seconded that we should accept. May I see all those in favour, please? Thank you, Parsman and Tom. Super, thank you very much. So, we move on to item 8, which is applications delegated to the Chief Executive. So we will, as usual, go through these page by page, unless there's anything that Mr. White wishes to draw our attention to beforehand. Right, so page 1, anything that members wish to raise on page 1, please?
One that was clear that was refused.
Chairman, that was refused, largely because there wasn't evidence there to demonstrate that it had a longer standing use. But we have received an appeal, so we shall see what happens. They may well produce some more evidence as part of that appeal.
Anything else on page 1? Page 2. Mrs. Chilcott.
Someone just talked through split decision.
So that's at the Havershire site.
Yes, so that's obviously the applicant applied to discharge a number of conditions in one go there. In this case, condition 12 is the particular condition here which resulted in a split decision. Condition 12 relates to a design lighting scheme. There was insufficient evidence or detail to be able to discharge that condition. We did actually spend quite a long time trying to get to a point where we could agree the details. That wasn't forthcoming, so in the end, to allow the other conditions to be discharged, a split decision was made to discharge the other conditions listed there, but condition 12 has been refused in terms of discharge, but they will be able to come back with details in the future should they wish to discharge it.
Okay. The one at the bottom of that page, the Wells Head asked, which I think was the one that attention of members was drawn to at the previous meeting.
Yeah, proved controversial application, Chairman. That was lots of interest locally and more widely. It did come up against objections from the Landscape Officer, Wildlife Officer, Natural England, Exford Parish Council and Exmoor Parish Council had concerns with the scheme as well. Ultimately, there was landscape and visual impact concerns with development as well as ecological concerns. It does lie within a special area of conservation and a triple SI. So a number of issues there, Chairman, that they would need to work through and we resolved to reduce.
Yes, Mr. Gray.
Yeah, I think it's good to see that decision, and I hope a lot of local people take note of that and are reassured that when it goes through a thorough process, common sense prevails. I drove past that area recently, and the mobile signal I was getting was fine, so it's good to see it's come through that way. Well done.
Okay. And then moving on to page 3, the 3 from the end, which was refused at East Holcombe Hawkridge.
This is another discharge condition application. I mean, they weren't able to produce the evidence for us to be able to discharge conditions again, Chairman, so that's why it's been refused.
Was it both conditions, or presumably it would have been a split decision if one of them had been approved, so presumably both of them have been regarded as insufficiently evidenced?
It is both conditions, yeah.
And what would dust control management have been?
Off the top of my head, Chairman, I'm not sure. It's one I've not been involved with. I'm happy to go away and come back with.
Just intrigued by dust control.
It normally, with sorry, Chair, on residential development, is suppressing dust with water sprays. As simple as that. But whether that's the case here, I do not know.
I'm not sure we would ask for it. I would need to check the permission.
It's a development where I would have thought that was not terribly relevant, but it would be interesting to know. It's a relatively small house extension. Anyway, interesting to know if you can let us know.
I will. I'll come back.
Thank you. Right. Anything else at all on the officer's decisions? Right. In that case, can I give you notice that should there need to be a site visit in the near future, the next date to make a note of in your diaries will be Friday the 3rd of May. And I think it is very important that now we are a planning committee, we do, as planning committee members, make careful notes of those dates, and please try to keep them clear if at all possible. We will try to let you know as early as possible if the date is not required, but it is important that you do try to keep that date available if at all possible, bearing in mind that the pool of members from whom site visit attendees can be drawn is now that much smaller. Mrs. Chilcott.
As this is a new committee and now it's not all the members of the authority, just for clarification, we'll notice the site visits be going out to all members or just those on planning? I'm just thinking about substitutes, etc. And will those not on the planning committee, should they so wish, be able to go on a site visit just in case they do need a substitute?
Good question. I don't know whether the standing orders refer to that, do they? Mrs. Reid?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't see any problem with all members being notified of a site visit should they, for information, should they wish to attend, but we can check that subsequently.
We're still to some degree evolving the new processes, so I think we'll just need to check on the site visit protocols, if that's okay.
Thank you, that's the question.
Thank you. I am not aware of any other urgency under item 10, so I will move to item 11, which is confidential business, and to read, to consider passing a resolution pursuant to section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the duration of item 12 on the grounds that publicity would be prejudicial to the public interest by reason of the confidential nature of the business arising in item 12, legal matters, and that the following information be considered, which is exempt information as presented in Schedule 12A of the Act as amended, and that is in respect of information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. I will move that from the Chair. Is that seconded? May I see all those in favour, please? Thank you. We don't have any members of the public present in the room, but the recording now needs to cease. Having dealt with that item, we now have come to the end of this first meeting of the Planning Committee. Can I thank you all very much for your attendance? I will now, I think, email all members of the committee just to remind them that if they are not able to be present, they do need to nominate their substitute. as early as possible, and certainly prior to 24 hours before the meeting takes place. We do need to make sure that we have as full an attendance as possible in the interest of good decision making and transparency. Mrs. Shawcott.
Just a query regarding the 24 hours, really, because, you know, things do crop up.
Yes.
Prolapses. Christine wasn't feeling well today, sickness, diarrhoea. I'm just wondering whether there is some latitude there that, you know, if it is a sudden and urgent issue, that we can have some flexibility. I don't know what the quoracy is for this meeting, but I would rather have someone here, albeit without the 24-hour notice, than not at all. That's my personal view.
Mrs. Reid? We're not really debating this now, but...
No, I think this is what we have in the scheme of delegation at the moment. So if we wish to change it, then that would have to come back to change. So I think when we debated it originally, we did feel that, you know, as much notice as possible is preferable. There was an understanding that, you know, these things do happen and people can't attend. 24 hours was considered to be the appropriate, you know, sort of cut-off. So I think that's, I guess, what we're going to proceed with, you know, and we'll see how things go.
And I think it's always going to be difficult to legislate in every circumstance. But really, I think the exhortation is to members to make sure that they get substituted. One of the issues I think we've got today is that some members haven't organised substitutes, even though clearly they've given their apologies at some distance in advance. So it is just a reminder to everybody, please make sure you've got substitutes. Mr. Holtham and then Mrs. Nicholson.
All I was going to say was force majeure. If there is a force majeure, you can't do very much about it, and I think there has to be a general acceptance that that may occur.
Mrs. Nicholson.
Just a thought, and recognising that the scheme of delegation is the scheme of delegation that we have, that whether, when we get to the next point of looking at that, it might be appropriate to stress rather than the 24 hours, the having read the papers, and that if a member has read the papers, then that is the bit that matters rather than the specific number of minutes or hours.
Okay, well, we'll bear that in mind for any future review. Mr. Gray.
Just a point on the next meeting I can make, but I can't make the site visit. So it seems sensible to me that if the site visit is important, then I don't attend the planning. But
well, it's never been a requirement that you can't consider something at planning if you haven't been on the site visit.
Okay.
What we need to do is to make sure that members who are at planning have as wide an understanding as possible, but it's recognised that not everybody will be able to go on the site visit. What we want is the people who were at the site visit to be able to report back to the rest of the committee, and the rest of the committee to take due cognizance of what they've said. So that tension, I suppose, has always been inherent in the process, but I certainly wouldn't say if you can't go to the site visit, you can't go to the planning meeting.
Okay. Good guide, thank you.
Chairman, in other places, and I'm sure you're aware, the main criteria is that the person you are nominating to take your place, he has been trained, has done the training. That's the one criteria, isn't it? And I think if there is a pool in other places of trained people, apart from the committee, you're on that list, and the clerk can then ring around and try and get somebody if there is a gap. But I think we're not quite there, are we?
Well, I mean, whilst we have to maintain our training, and the training is ongoing, at least we start from a position where all authority members had planning training, so we do at least have that advantage in this authority compared to many others. Right, I've got Mrs. Nicholson and then Mrs. Chilton.
Well, just to, we are all trained, and we are all trained at the moment, because that's how we are. I would encourage us to continue all to be trained, so that we don't have this nonsense, because we have this nonsense of difficulty with substitutes, because we have difficulty enough in that we have to find our substitutes within our own groups. And that, frankly, is problem enough. So let's all keep being trained.
Mrs. Gilcott and then Mr. Keane.
Just on the subject of training, really, again, quite often training quite sensibly might be tacked on before or after a planning meeting if it's planning training, and again it's ensuring that those that are not on the planning committee now also have that training so they're always up to date when they substitute.
I'm conscious of the fact that we mustn't have a debate about something which isn't on the agenda.
Even that we agree on.
Yeah. We're having a discussion, but again, it isn't agendaed, so Mr. Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was thinking it is really difficult finding somebody short notice who happens to be one of the other one or two people on your group. Is that so important, or should we be maybe relaxing that? It's more important to get the full complement of the planning committee than it is to try and part.
I can't remember if it's a convention or a stipulation in the standing orders whether or not it has to be somebody from within your group.
Well, I think it was discussed, I think. Was it included?
Claire?
I'm trying to find it. Just it was certainly that was the intention.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whether we actually wrote it in the standing orders, I'm not sure, because sometimes, sometimes it...
I mean, the thing is that the membership of the committee is drawn from constituent groups, and we have constructed it so that it is very clearly based on the constituent elements of the authority.
Yeah.
So therefore it would make sense the substitutes also come from the constituent elements rather than just being drawn generally.
I agree, Chairman. However, I think it's far more important to have a full complement than it is to worry about compartmentalising.
And it might be, if we don't already say it, that there has to be some sort of cascade, that in the first instance membership should be drawn from this group, but if that is not possible then it can be from any other member.
I mean, the core for the group is 4.
Yeah.
So, it's not as if there's going to be issue in terms of being able to make decisions, but I understand what you're saying in relation to wanting to have the full,
and it's about transparency as well.
And discussion amongst the groups, but yeah.
Right, that was helpful, thank you.
Okay.
Right, if there's nothing else, ladies and gentlemen, I will declare the meeting closed.